Thank you very much for inviting me to come along. So, my talk is called Back to Basics, aka Why Can't We Get This Stuff Right? So for those who haven't heard of me, my name is Jess Dodson. I'm also known as Girl Germs. I am a customer engineer in security and identity with Microsoft. So I come from a background of being a system administrator. So I was a sysadmin for 15 plus years. I kind of fell from being an identity system administrator into being a security engineer somehow. I don't know how I managed that one. So I just fell into security. Um, so this very first slide, I'm very privileged that someone actually created these gorgeous drawings of me. So my cranky face is kind of a warning for the way that I go through this topic. It's basic stuff that after being in the industry for about 16, 17 years, I keep seeing these things. Despite saying that we need to fix them, I keep seeing them pop up. Now, a lot of them are common sense, but if they were common sense, surely we'd be seeing them done more, I would hope. So if you do see what I consider to be dodgy practices here that you might be guilty of, do not stress. You are definitely not alone. So thinking of this presentation, just think of it as reaffirming what you know to be good practice. It's not deeply technical. It's from a higher sort of higher level. But feel free to ask some questions at the end if you want me to go technical on any of them. There is some Microsoft terminology, obviously, because I come from a Microsoft background, but it is very applicable to all environments. I'm pretty much security entertainment now with memes. So my presentation is very meme heavy. So if you don't like memes, now is the time to tune out. Um, there are way too many of these basic things as well for me to go into. So I couldn't go into heavy detail on every single one of them. And I know I will have missed things. So if there are things that have been missed, please feel free to let me know. More than happy to take on constructive criticism and add more into this deck. Happy to do so. If you think I've got something wrong as well, more than happy to argue about that down the track on Twitter. Totally cool to do that as well. So the breakdown of this talk, it's done via the NIST framework. So identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. So most of my focus as a blue teamer, which I guess I am, is on the identify and protect side. We want to make things as strong and protected as we possibly can. A little bit of love for the detect side with a couple of tidbits for respond and recover. Um, don't stress about copying the presentation. I've got a copy of this that I'm actually going to be putting up on my blog as a full piece, and I do actually have a checklist at the very end, a link that you can go off and do to actually tick off all of the items as we go through. So onwards. So first up, we've got identify, and I identified that we're really bad at identifying things. Do you know what you have? Is your asset system up to date? Do you know the number of storage accounts? Do you know your databases? Do you know all of your applications? Do you do an audit and check that the information you have is accurate and up to date? An asset system, a CMDB, it isn't set and forget. We have to make sure that when our systems change, which they do, that our asset and our inventory information does as well. I haven't yet been into an organization that has an inventory of all of their systems accurate and up to date unless they can fit all of their systems on a single page in an Excel spreadsheet. And please don't use Excel spreadsheets as your CMDB. Um, without this, so without having an accurate inventory, it's incredibly difficult to be able to assist in protecting your systems. You don't know what you don't know, and you can't protect it if you don't know about it. Um, and the flip side of that is if you don't know about it, how are you supposed to recover it? Don't have single points of failure. So, um, single points of failure when it comes to tech It's bad. We all know that that's the case. But it is way, way worse when it comes to people. We all know that we've got that one person who knows everything, and having that one person really isn't good. And everyone's worked somewhere where this is the norm. In my last workplace, his name was Ken. And everyone has a Ken. This person is the repository of all technical knowledge in an organization. They are a walking wiki, if you like, of not just the what, but the how and the why. And managers rely on them far, far too much. So we need to make sure that the information that that person has in their head, that they are getting time to actually get that information out. Because what happens if that person gets sick? What happens if that person goes on leave? What happens if, God forbid, they leave the company? Um, you need to share that knowledge. That knowledge needs to come out. It needs to be distributed so that other people know what's going on. And I think the big thing that comes out from that is that you need to give that person time to share that knowledge. Usually the people who have that amount of information in their head are the ones that are flat strap working from like 7 a.m. through till 7 p.m. because they're the ones that just gets things done. So making sure that there is time being set aside for those people to get that information out of their heads. And the flip side of that is that everyone is responsible. And if everyone is responsible, then no one is responsible. So we need to make sure that we have business owners and system managers to own your risks, and not just own them, but understand them. I think that's probably the biggest issue that I come across when dealing with organizations and customers when we're talking about risk. It's not just a tick and flick. It's not just a, yes, I accept the risk, except when the proverbial hits the fan, and then I'm going to blame you. We need to make sure that they actually understand the risk that they are taking on, and they are actually responsible. And this is especially critical when it comes to our data. Data is managed by someone, it is owned by someone, it is looked after by someone. We need to make sure that the people who are owning that data are aware of the fact that they own that data and that they are responsible for that data, but also the people who are managing that data know who their owners are. They understand who the owner is for that data so that if something is to go wrong, you know who to go and speak to. And we need that really clear delineation between who is the owner and who is the manager. So as most techs, we tend to be system managers. We are not technically the data owners. We look after the systems that host the data. We make sure that the systems are available, but the data itself is owned by somebody else. And making sure that we know who owns it is really, really important. Um, and as part of that as well, we need to make sure that when we're looking at risks, it's not just this thing is a risk. We actually need to make sure that we are writing down why something is a risk. So risk registers are really important, and they can be a massive help to you, particularly in the case of major security incidents. Accountability is really important. So when we're talking about who is accountable for, particularly when it comes to outages, who is accountable for that, not so much from the point of view of being able to point fingers, but being able to help get things back up and running, and who is accountable when it comes to reporting back up the business. The side of that as well that we need to talk about is managers needing to protect their staff. So we need managers to be those shields to help look after their staff. So um, I don't know how much of some of the recent security incidents you might be aware of, but we had an incident just recently in a large organization where they decided to blame their interns for the issue. Please don't blame your interns. It's not their fault. Just because it was right doesn't mean it is still right. So the it's not broken, don't fix it mentality really does need to change. And that does seem to be something that we see quite a lot with a lot of techs. It's one of those, it's working, I'm going to step away very slowly. And if I don't touch it, everything's going to be fine. Um, an example, SMBV1, great for its time. but it's still out there and we need to make it go away and die a very painful death. So just because something was good doesn't mean it is still good, doesn't mean it is still the best way to do something. We're looking for efficiencies and effectiveness. We're looking to try and improve on how things can be done. One of the ways that we can look at doing this, listen to your new staff. If you have new hires who are coming in, and they're suggesting new ways of doing things or suggesting new technologies to look at, listen to them. They can be incredibly valuable because they're not bogged down in the organizational mindset of this is how we've always done it, so this is how we're always going to do it. Just write the thing. Please don't leave it in your head. Yes, I know it's tedious. Yes, I know it's boring. Yes, I know it's time consuming, but it is so damn important. I can't emphasize it enough. We need to document everything. No matter that you think it's not important, no matter if you think it's not important or not worthwhile for someone else to know, if you've had to do something, you need to write it down. If you've had to change something, you need to write it down. Um, in security breaches in particular, this kind of documentation is vital, but it's also really useful in operational work and just day-to-day maintenance so that you know exactly what is happening in your environment. Mainly from the point of view of, again, if the proverbial hits the fan, you're going to want that documentation on hand. You want to know what has been done, why things have been done, and who's done them so that you've got those points of contact. When it comes to educating our users, I think it is probably our weakest link as IT operations and technical staff. We need to do it in a far more meaningful way that actually involves them without being patronizing towards them, whoever your customer is. And for data managers and data system owners, educating your business owners over what they are responsible for, the risks that are associated with their data, and what you need to do in order to look after their data is really, really important. Um, we need to find a way to do it in a way that brings our users along with us on the journey. So we as techs complain continuously about our end users. And let's be honest, we have to vent sometimes. But we wouldn't have as much to complain about if we actually educated our users properly. There is no such thing as a stupid question. And that is my mantra when I'm dealing with anyone. There is no such thing as a stupid question because chances are, if there is a question that you want to ask, someone else also wants to ask that question and is looking for that answer. So let your users ask those questions without fear of being mocked or having a patronizing or sarcastic response. Spending time with them to understand the work that they are doing, so that you can understand what it is that you do and how what you do fits into what they do. Remembering we're in customer service. That's our job. Despite the fact that we deal with technology and we deal with pieces of hardware and we deal with cloud-based systems and we deal with a lot of command line stuff. We are in customer service. Our aim is to ensure that the systems that we are looking after and that we are creating or managing are available for our users. That means that we are in customer service. Um, and the reason that I say that is that we are not an expert in what our customers do. We don't know how to do their job, so why should we expect them to be able to do ours or be experts in the job that we do? Um, so getting our users to understand the why just as much as the how. I find that when we explain to our users the why behind what we're doing, it makes the how and the what a little bit more palatable. Um, if they don't know the why, chances are they will find a way to circumvent around what you are looking at doing, particularly when it comes to security. And usability is what they're after. So ensuring that you're not compromising that. And security is always that very fine line between making something as secure as possible to the point that no one can access it, at which point, what's the point? And making sure that there is usability so that people can do what they need to be able to do. So walking that very fine line. So now that we've identified all of our things, we need to go off and protect all of the things. Now, for you guys, while I know that you are very Azure and cloud focused, I am very big on cloud infrastructure. But we need to be aware that there isn't just the cloud. The cloud is lovely, the cloud is beautiful, the cloud is shiny, and everyone always jumps onto the new and shiny, but it's not all there is. We are going to be stuck with hybrid for a very, very, very long time. Despite what anyone tells you, it's going to be the way forward for a long time. So before looking at the new and shiny that may be available up in the cloud, we need to look at what your cloud is connected to and protect that first. So, coming from my personal experience, everyone wants to play around with the new funky things up inside Azure and Azure AD, but forgets that they've got an on-prem AD that's synchronized through, that's connecting up into Azure AD, and their on-prem AD is their weakest link, which means that we need to make sure that we are looking after all of the pieces in between. We need to make sure that we're not just jumping on the new and shiny bandwagon. We actually are looking after some of those old and busted systems that really do need our love and attention. As techs, we are the worst hypocrites. We tell our users to do one thing and then we go and do another. Um, if you are an admin, any kind of admin, doesn't matter what you are, you need to eat your own dog food. So if you are telling users that they can't have administrative rights or they can't have full ownership over particular things on their standard accounts, you bet your ass you're not having it on yours either. So if you're telling users that they can't have specific applications installed because they're insecure, but you're putting in exclusions for yourself, you bet that I'm going to get cranky if I come into your organization and find that. Um, if you expect your users to do it, you have to be willing. Um, More than that, you have to be happy to be able to do it as well. And this is because if you can do your job while jumping through these security hoops, then they will definitely be able to do theirs. And it makes it far harder for them to argue the point that they shouldn't be restricted in the same way that you are. Um, Now, dog food is also very, very, very applicable to senior management. So I know a number of C-level execs who have special permissions set on their accounts or on their access rights to say that they get to do things that normal users can't do. Definitely needs to be excluded. We need to be able to say, look, you are what we consider to be a sensitive user because of the level of information you are likely to have access to. You definitely need these high level permissions added onto your account. You need to have MFA. You need to have conditional access. You need to make sure that you are giving us at least two factors of authentication when you're coming in. We want to make sure that when that particular person, particularly of a C level, is coming in and accessing data, that they are who they say they are. Default passwords, insecure passwords, the same passwords. Why is this still happening? Um, I honestly didn't think that this needed to be said, but it really does. Um, it was public knowledge that back in 2018, an Australian government agency had a penetration test done, and they were popped in less than 10 minutes. And that was because the passwords for some of their appliances that they had in their server room were default. They were set to admin and password. That is incredibly embarrassing. So please don't use defaults. And I'm not just talking about enterprise when I'm talking about these shit passwords that we're looking at. Thinking of your own hardware, thinking of your PCs, your home router, switches, modems, your own home devices. We've got so many different ways of being able to generate much more secure passwords that um, it seems ridiculous to say, can you please not use password 123 as your password? Um, what I want to see is these kind of things disappearing entirely. I do love the idea of using more biometrics when it comes to our authentication mechanisms, mainly because it's much, much harder to fake. But also from the point of view of it's one less thing that we then have to manage. It's not every day you're going to change your face. Um, And one of the other things that comes up in regards to this is those passwords that we're sharing with others. Sharing is not always caring. Um, I really don't like seeing generic shared accounts being used in high level groups. So, looking at things like SQL admin or root or AV admin, all these kind of things that I see in the organizations that I go into where they've created these accounts. There are multiple people using them. They're using a really crappy password, but we have no way of working out exactly who it is that's using that account. So making sure that when we are utilizing accounts that we are using our own, but also that if we are looking at sharing a password, that we are doing it in a secure way. So look at storing them securely. Use password managers. We've got paid ones, we've got free ones. There are ones that are purely local. If you are paranoid about storing that kind of data up in the cloud, whatever you prefer to use it. I'm not here to dictate what you should be looking at using. I'm just here to make sure that you are using something. Something is better than nothing. Um, when it comes to those shared credentials as well, I don't want to see those shared credentials in those high level administrative groups. I want to get them all out. So just remove them. It should be very clearly delineated accounts that have assigned users to them so that I know who has those permissions. Service accounts. Um, please get these out of any of your high level admin groups, please. I don't like service accounts. I think they're horrible. They're the kind of accounts that get created and get spun up and everyone forgets about them and they probably had the same password for like the past 6 years. Um, please don't ask your identity folks to assign full permissions to these accounts as well. Seriously, we do not like doing that. And if they're worth anything, they will likely snarl at you and say, no, you need to tell me what permissions you actually need. So make sure you are asking for the correct rights, assign them those specific roles, specific permissions. Those kind of accounts, they do not need root, they do not pass go, they do not collect $200. We don't want to have high level permissions assigned to service accounts that are purely there to do maybe one minuscule thing and it's just laziness that's saying, give it the top level, we can't be bothered working out what it actually needs to do. And when it comes to servicing your service accounts, when was the last time you changed your passwords on them? When was the last time you audited them to make sure they're actually being used for what they're supposed to be being used for? Um, in Windows land, we've got group managed service accounts, we've got managed identities and service principals up in Azure. Make sure you're using something like these so that there is a way for those accounts to be managed that's automated and not reliant on you having to do it all. And remember that role-based access control is your friend. So please use it. Don't just go for that top level is easier. I can't be bothered. Your entire MSP does not need to have global admin rights in Azure. They really don't. Um, work out what rights are actually needed and fine tune based on what's required. The whole idea of least privilege, and I shouldn't need to be talking about least privilege. I've been talking about it for at least the last 7 or 8 years in user groups and conferences and online. It should be ingrained into us that we only need to give the right permissions, no more, no less. It's part of the essential eight. So this is something that everyone should be doing automatically. Um, an example of this is for myself. When I go into a customer, all I want is read permissions. I just want read. That's it. Nothing else. I don't need anything else. I don't want anything else. Um, and tied to this one as well is software coming into your environment. So, software or appliances or applications that are requiring root or domain admin or global admin. Um, if any application says that they need those, seriously, just tell them to get out. They do not need that. That's just sheer laziness on behalf of whoever has created it. There will certainly be permissions that they need to have, perhaps on setup, and they may need some of those permissions on initial setup, but they do not need them going forward. The same thing goes for any contractors coming into organizations. Make sure that their permissions are what they actually need to do their job, no more and no less. Don't just find someone who they're sitting beside and go, you're going to be doing a similar job to them. We'll give you exactly the same permissions. All that does is lead to what we call permission scope creep, where people end up collecting permissions and they never get rid of them. Rank does not equal access. So when we're looking at limiting our privileges as to who has root or domain admin or global admin, we need to make sure that that high rank doesn't equal that high level of access. So just because a person is a manager of a team of people, so for an example, if they're a manager of a group of people looking after SQL databases, they do not need the keys to all of those databases. They do not need administrative rights over those database servers. They do not need permissions inside of all of those databases. I have actually been in that position with a manager. It is not fun. I did fight tooth and nail to prevent them from getting access. And it wasn't because I don't trust them. It's because I know that accidents happen, particularly with higher levels of permissions. And that kind of access shouldn't be given to people who aren't directly responsible for it. It comes back to that responsibility versus risk. So the way that I like to explain it, unless you are the person getting a call at 2 o'clock in the morning because something has gone boom, you don't need that level of access. And the flip side to that is managers need to trust their staff. You were hired for a reason. Either your managers trust you to do your job or they don't. And if you don't trust them, then why did you hire them? If you can put MFA on it, put MFA on it. Now, I'm not a huge fan of SMS, but 2FA of any kind is better than no MFA. We've all got to start somewhere. So look at doing things like administrative accounts first, do small accounts. The other thing as well, it's not just for work. So as an example for this, MFA every account that you think you've got the ability to. If you can turn MFA on it, as I said, put MFA on it. Your identity as an administrator is invaluable. So putting MFA on all of your own accounts, so Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit, Slack, GitHub, all of those have the ability for you to have MFA turned on. Please turn it on. Your identity is tied to what you do. And if anyone knows what it is that you do, it then gives them an in. So making sure that you have that ability to tie down your own identity, not just within work, but outside of work. Account segregation is something that I'm seeing more and more of, but I do see that it isn't always being done. So you do actually need more than one account. And for most system administrators, we need a minimum of two. So you've got, for some admins, they will actually end up with four, but a minimum of two, it's a good start. So normally we have high level God tier admins. So thinking of your domain admins and your global admins, you've got server administration accounts, and all they can do is access servers. So we're talking that tier one level. And then you've got your desktop admins, and occasionally developers fall into that one as well because they have access to some dev systems. And then you've got your standard user account. They should not be the same. Even in a cloud environment, your standard user account should not be what you are using to perform administrative functions on anything within the cloud or on-prem. It should be a completely separate account. And on top of that, I highly recommend using something like privileged identity management. So that way the access isn't permanent. It means that no one has the level of access that they need until they elevate up and they request it. And then occasionally there might be some approvals involved in that, or it could be an instant elevation, but there's at least an audit trail involved in that access being granted. And once that access is granted, it's only granted on a temporary basis. So it means that that access is then revoked after a period of time, so it isn't permanent on that account. Any rules are still a thing. So please, for the love of all you hold holy, don't turn off your software firewalls. Any line of defense is better than no defense. So I am 100% for keeping client-side firewalls turned on. It's an extra layer of security. It's an extra layer of logging for when things go wrong. Except if you have an any in place. Now, I often see any's put in for testing purposes, and then it's just left there because, hey, it's working. Why would we want to change it? Um, Make sure that if you do testing with any that you do go back and you take a look, you work out exactly what ports are being utilized, and you lock down your ports. Only leave open the ones you actually need and monitor the ones you leave open. It is completely useless turning a firewall, a software firewall on and then putting an any in place. You might as well turn it off. Um, EDR, it's not just for user endpoints. Um, we need to make sure that we are putting EDR capabilities onto our servers and our systems. So we're looking at that endpoint detection and response. Um, we need to make sure that we are, of course, putting the correct exclusions in place. There are some systems that do not like running with EDR in place. And we're not just putting and exclude everything. Again, like the any rule, entirely defeats the purpose of having it running in the first place. Um, you really don't want to make servers sick, but even your own machine. I mean, it looks really sad. So I'm really surprised by the number of administrators, and I have to admit, and I feel really bad about this. Probably about 10 years ago, I was one of those. It's like, I'm not going to click on anything. It's totally fine. Um, yeah, no, we do. We are terrible for installing things onto our machines, and most of us still have admin rights on our own home machines, so that there is that possibility of installing bad things. So it comes back to that dog food piece. If we're forcing our users to do it, then we should be doing it, and we should be upping the ante slightly and doing it on everything and protecting all of our systems. Encryption. If you can turn it on, turn it on. Um, for most systems, particularly up in the cloud now, it's a checkbox when you're setting it up. Would you like to encrypt this? Why, yes, I would. Please just make sure that you are checking that checkbox. And we're not just talking about data at rest, we're talking encryption in transit as well. So data moves. We want to make sure that it's secure in whatever state it's in, be it in transit or at rest. Patch Patch and patch again. I do see quite frequently that patching is just not being done. And we do tend to be leaving very large holes behind. And I feel very bad calling it out, but I know that my lovely database administrators in my last role were very guilty of this in that they patched their systems and their SQL databases once every 12 months. So please check for updates, check for patches, particularly check for any of those security updates that are being pushed out, and install them as soon as feasible. By all means, do testing. I understand that we need to make sure that it's not going to break anything, but don't have that kind of a yearly patching schedule. And this doesn't just apply to servers, this applies to everything. It applies to applications, appliances, servers, workstations, you name it. Make sure you are updating everything. Um, and tied to that, similar to that whole if it's not broken, don't fix it vein, um, we need to make sure that we're updating our versions of software as well. So security by obsolescence is just, it's not a thing anymore. We need to make sure that we are actually bringing up the versions of software that we're using and making sure that they are on more recent, more stable, more secure versions. I don't want to see really old versions of Java running on machines because the applications that they're running require that version of Java. So now we're moving on to the we think something has happened or we know something has happened stage. So we were discussing this a little bit before I started my talk. If no one looks, did it really happen? So when it comes to logging, we need to make sure that we are very, very careful in choosing the logs that we are actually maintaining and keeping a copy of. So pick and choose those logs and making sure that we've got that coverage because you don't know what you can't see. Um, when it comes to event logs, be they system, security, application specific, whatever they are so incredibly important in tracking what has happened and when it's happened. And it's not just in security incidents, even in basic troubleshooting and day-to-day BAU. Event logs can be a lifesaver when you're tracking back exactly what has occurred in an environment. Understanding where to find them, um, how to understand what they actually are and how to read them, as well as centrally storing them somewhere. So just because you are logging on your individual machines or appliances or applications doesn't mean you are actually doing anything good with that data. They roll over so quickly. So we need to make sure that they are being centrally stored somewhere. Now, it isn't just the responsibility of security and security teams. You know your systems and your data better than anyone. So you should be the ones putting up your hand to say, hey, we've got this kind of data. We know that it's considered sensitive or high risk. We want to make sure that we are actually monitoring and auditing that successfully. Here are the logs that we recommend should be pushed through to whatever central logging system you're actually using. And because we do find that logs roll over far too quickly, we need to make sure that we are doing that logging on a regular basis. It can be expensive, but we know from experience, just looking at some of the incidents that have occurred over the last 6 months, that not looking after your systems and not having a good response plan can be far more expensive than actually putting protection and detection in place to start with. Now, while it's great to log everything, we need to make sure that we're actually fine tuning what we're logging. So if you have systems that are producing any alerts, we need to make sure that we are fine tuning those alerts. There is no use alerting for everything because then we end up with boy who cried wolf. So you need to make sure that what is being sent through is legitimate, that it is actionable. It's not just a false or benign positive. And knowing the difference between what is considered to be a false positive versus a benign positive from a security perspective is really, really important when it comes to closing, suppressing, or excluding specific alerts from coming through. Um, the other thing that happens with this is please don't just stand up a new tool because it's new and shiny. It seems to be the go-to at the moment that we get 90% of things monitored using this one particular tool, and then we've got that 10% that's remaining, and then we see a new tool, and so we get that 10%, we move 90% of that 10% onto the new monitoring tool, and so forth in perpetuity forever. So just stop it. Pick one, just one. We only need one. Just find whatever you want to use and do that one and monitor everything with that. Um, as I mentioned before as well, paying attention to alerts is really important. So if you're not getting enough signal and you're getting too much noise, it means that things are going to get missed, and that we're seeing things coming through that are actually important. And when it comes to actually looking at that data, as I mentioned, collection isn't detection. So just because we're collecting it, that's great, but unless someone's actually looking at it, it it's just another set of data. That's great. So making sure someone is actually paying attention to it. And that may not be you, that may be someone in your security team, but making sure, going back to the identify stage, that you have identified those responsibilities and who is the owner versus who is the manager of that kind of data. So when we are responding and recovering, how do we go about doing it? Back up all your shit, all of it. Anything that is considered important, anything that's considered vital, anything that is mission critical, if you were to need it tomorrow in order for your business to run, it needs to be backed up. So, crypto and ransomware is still out there. It is still probably the biggest thing that we are seeing from a security landscape that is causing the most headaches to customers. We had one recently here, and it was a multinational one. It was a meat processing organization that ended up, I think it was a $17 million ransom that they paid due to a ransomware attack. So if they had had consolidated backups and they understood where all of their data was, they wouldn't have been $17 million out of pocket. Um, we still have users clicking on things. We still have users doing silly things, and we can try and mitigate as much as possible. But sometimes shit just happens. Um, so backing up, really important. But if we're backing things up, we need to make sure we can restore it. Okay. So a backup is useless unless it can be restored, obviously. Um, so you are responsible for the data that underpins a system. So ensuring the integrity and availability when we're looking at the CIA triangle of information, it's really vital for that data, making sure that we can actually get that data back. Planning is key. Have a plan, any kind of plan. And just like the backups, test the plan. So you really do need to understand what you need to do, who you need to speak to, what systems are considered critical, where the dependencies are, and follow that particular plan. And make improvements and updates to the plan when you need to. There is no use having a contact list if it's 5 years out of date and getting a call from someone in an organization that you've left in regards to an identity system that you're no longer responsible for. So making sure that you are actually updating those disaster recovery plans, particularly when new systems are brought in, when staff changes occur, and that they are being tested. Look at tabletop exercises. So get involved in those tabletop exercises. Security. Look, security staff are wonderful, but a lot of the time we are not the technical experts in our fields when it comes to the individual systems that you're managing. We know the security aspect of it, but you understand how it's all put together and, more importantly, why it's all put together. So we need you involved in our security incident response plans. Get involved in those tabletop exercises. Put your hand up and say that you want to participate and be able to help out when you're looking at running those. It lets you test in relative safety what would or could happen in an incident, either security or operational incident. So things do break. We need to make sure that we've got a plan in order to be able to fix them. Um, and when incidents do occur, we need managers to back off. Um, let techs do their jobs. Don't stand over their shoulder. Don't send them emails or IMs asking them where things are at. Um, we have incident managers for a reason. And in most high level orgs that are running some form of ITIL, there is an incident manager. So don't go around those people. All it does is slow things down. I've seen it far too many times. There is a poor sysadmin trying to get data back or trying to restore a service with 7 or 8 people all around them trying to ask them what's going on. That's not helping anyone. It is okay to screw up. So everyone screws up. It's inevitable. And my biggest piece of advice is to own your own mistakes. So don't try and hide them or minimize them. Don't bury your head in the sand and pretend they're going to go away. Be honest and say that you screwed up. It comes down to people not playing the blame game, making sure that organizations aren't picking and choosing and saying, this is your fault. We need managers to back off a little bit and actually let people take ownership of their own mistakes without fearing that their head is on the chopping block. And tying back to my last point perfectly, it is okay to ask for help. You can't know everything. You can't do it all by yourself. Asking for help is not a weakness. It is a sign of strength in my eyes, just from the point of view of It means that you are aware of your own limitations and you want to make sure that you are doing the best you can do. You know what you can do and where those limitations are, and you want help to be able to cover any of the gaps. And tying into that, find your tribe. So I asked for help and I got it when it came to this particular presentation. So you need to find people who you can ask questions of, who you can vent to, rant at, commiserate with. My nerd tribe has helped me out far more times than I can count, and I owe them a huge debt of gratitude. So make sure you've got your own tribe of people. It could be the people in this user group who you can speak to and ask questions of and know that you're in a safe space. As I mentioned at the very beginning, this is the link that will take you off to the full checklist of the security things that I was talking about. So that is Girl Germs Back to Basics. That is what the GGB2B means. Feel free to print that out and either tick off the ones that you can do and then use that checklist to sort of whack the people that you need to in order to fix the stuff that you can't. So now hopefully you can all go off and secure all of your things. So that's my talk. The fact that you haven't fallen asleep means that you're all very, very awesome. So thank you very much. Hopefully you're already doing some, if not most of these things, which makes for a very happy Jess, as you can see. If you think I have missed anything, there's anything that I can add in, feel free to let me know. If you want to talk to me more or debate me on any of these, feel free to come and yell at me on Twitter. I'm more than used to it.